So we start again on, even though we are a part of Europe, we are like as far away from you as we possibly can. And even though all people of Europe have a certain affinity, we are dealing with different forces. It's amazing to come here. You're so aware of the history and the human nature, in a way, which is also nature. But we are, as humans, we have so little to say in our country because we are such a small part of what goes on. Because it's the elements, it's the weather, it's the winds, and it's the underlying fire, which can come up wherever, whenever, and we never know where it will happen next. And it happens quite regularly. And perhaps this is very important to us as a nation because it sort of like keeps our humility down. And there's a great need because Icelanders are quite boastful, but we always have this in the back of our minds. There is something greater than us. And, oh, I'm going backwards. So we start here by a mountain called Mount Hekla. Let's see, I have a pointer here. No pointer, it's a big white mountain, which is almost like a sacred mountain in the eyes of Icelanders. And that's the one that's been erupting most regularly. But luckily, they're not so big, the eruptions, so even though it causes quite a devastation every time it erupts, people are now trying to heal the land around. Our first project is a part of this healing process, and we have been working with these people who are our clients, and they are like a part of a rare breed of Icelanders that take responsibility in life, and they have gone out there. They've been there for over a decade trying to grow the black sands that the mountain leaves behind. And they, after 10 years, thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to sleep in something else than a tent in the cold while we're tending the land? And they wanted to have a little shelter on the ground that they are trying to cultivate. And they are very careful because they know this land very well, so they were very sensitive about the responsibility of building in open nature. And your footprint or whatever you make as a construction will be seen for miles away, so it's a very delicate issue. And gradually we realized that the only right thing to do was to fold their little abode into the land and under the ground cover that they were trying to grow. And they selected the spot. It was between two sand dunes that are like linear dunes that came together at one point, and we made a house in between these dunes by a simple concrete slab that just lifts up. And underneath it there is their space, and they see to the north the mountain, to the south down along the river. And this is the building just like very soon after it was built, so they've already managed to heal the wound of the building, and it will disappear more and more into the ground. It's extremely simple, as best things are. So it's just a little space they have there in the middle, which is their living space, and then they have 2 bedrooms tucked into the side and a toilet area and an entrance that go into the land. And you see the section above, so the house extends a little bit into the land, but the windows to the outside are a little smaller, and they hold the view of the volcano to the north and down to the south towards the river. And what's quite interesting, and I think the owner, Helga, the woman, she said once to me, you know, I don't understand. I look at the house from the outside and it's tiny, you can hardly see it. And then you come inside and it's like the biggest house in the world, and you've got the world at your feet. And it's because it just opens, it is a part of the land, and it opens up to the land. And they have the little world there. They don't need anything. They make their own bread. And you see how the concrete roof flies over. You don't see the walls don't meet the ceiling. It's just like lifts itself over. And it's very, very simple. It's just rough concrete and then polished concrete and then one type of wood. So it's only 2 materials used in different ways. And it's like enables them to stay there all year round, whereas before they got very cold and damp. And this is something that's quite unique in Iceland, I think. When something needs to be done, people get up on their feet and do it themselves. It's like it's inherent in the nature of people, because we have been living so long without any rule or any. We are very different to other European countries, because it's basically a country without a rule. You will see that probably when you go there. So people are very instinctively, they help themselves and they go and deal with matters that need to be dealt with. You don't need any authority to tell you, you just get up on your feet and you go. But there are, of course, a lot of issues and disputes about things, and like with this, some people maintain that you should just have the black sands and let nature take its course, whereas these people say, no, we are going to have to help nature because it's so important, because once the destruction starts, it spreads to more grown areas, so you have to reverse it. And they're just doing it along with a few other people. And the state is actually coming into it a bit, but it's not sort of like over it all. So now I'll move to the city of Reykjavík, where more than half of the nation lives. And until the beginning of the 20th century, there was hardly anybody in Reykjavík. It was just a tiny village. And then, like in other countries, the search started. People moved from the country into the city. And this is about this time, 1910, suddenly it grew very quickly. And this is one of the main streets called Hverfisgata. Our office is actually on that street, very close to it. And it sort of developed like ordinary societies do. People like went about the business, and the shop owner on the corner was like the center of, he was probably the public space in the area, and people all came there and compared notes. And everybody went around in buses, and life was not very complicated then, and everybody knew each other, and it was just like quite a cohesive society. Pretty good agreement about where the nation was heading, and everyone had this great hope in the future. Then what happened was that these days disappeared, and we got into like consumerism and everything that came, because we are very close to America, you have to remember that. So we got everything instantly from America, all sorts of the motor car came very quickly to Iceland, and we got big supermarkets, and Steve will deal with that a little bit later. But society changed, and the little shop went into disrepair and was just neglected, and nobody wants to run a shop in this area any longer. So we have this friend who is a photographer, and he always goes against the current. So he bought his house and turned the old part of it into his studio and workshop, but he never really knew what to do with this bit. This is the old shop. And here we are in 2009, when the big crash was in Iceland in particular. I don't know if you know about it, but what Icelanders do, they do everything twice as their extreme. So we more or less just made up our country bankrupt, because the business life in Iceland just went overboard, and they borrowed a lot of money, and they more or less made the nation bankrupt. And this is like just after the crash has happened, and everybody, it was just like a paralyzed nation. And then this friend of ours, Sigurgeir, he gets up on his feet and says, well, boys and girls, now we're going to a building. So he decided to do his little protest against the globalization. You can see the big tower blocks there. This is where we had come to. We had started importing architects in Reykjavík. No, everybody wanted to live in tower blocks that were like abroad. And so more or less the nation had forgotten about its identity and its beginnings. So Sigurgeir said, okay, now I'm just going to go and do this, because nobody else is doing anything. So we went ahead and said, okay, what do you want to do? And he wanted to do a little gallery for his studio. And then he wanted a little garage for his sports car below. And we did a little project. It's only 23 square meters. And the other project I showed you is only 60 square meters. And this is only to tell you that in the small, there is so much interest. And so we went on with this idea of taking the old house, which he had already done, and we sort of like folded the old house out into a new building that was quite clearly a new building, but quite clearly also of our times, because we are not you cannot make your false identity. You have to be of the time you are. And that's what the building is. But the paid heat is like an extension of the old house and is embracing functions that enable the old house to continue into the future. So, and that's how we look at rebuilding the city, is you are putting in small insertions that can actually enable the city and liven up the old fabric of the city. And this is just to show you a little bit inside. You come in from the street and you go down to the garage, or you look up when you come in, or go up to the exhibition hall. Above you is a skylight, so you have this soft light coming down by the street, and there's a very clean exhibition space there. And this is just looking down, and again, it's only two materials, concrete and wood. But what we have here, we have history. We have the history of the old walls, we have some rough new walls, and we have some polished concrete. And then you have the street. And it also is a part of the same thing, because we really have a difficulty knowing where a building begins and where it ends, what is a public space and what is a private space. And this is like, things don't really have a beginning or an end. One thing merges to another. So here we see also the old world, the old house that he's done up, which is like of another time. And then you see the new extension, which also has remnants of time from before. You can see an old floor having been there, and there used to be a family living there. So you're always aware of things having gone before you. And now I come to this project that Dan was mentioning. When we were like 26 and 7 years old, just out of university, we took part in a competition in Iceland, which is an open competition. And that is quite unique for our country, because everything is very open and free. Like in Britain, there are almost no competitions like that. But this, we have a lot of those, or at that time we did. So we stupidly entered this competition and never even in our wildest dreams imagined we could end up doing it. So we did all sorts of silly things. Like we took the water, the lake. It's actually the city hall. I should explain that. And this is in 1986, the competition was. And the lake is like in the heart of the capital. It is like the center of the capital. So this is a very precious site and almost on a holy site. And the competition was really about the identity of the town, because the building, they had been trying to build this building for the last 30 years before this came, and they'd never been able to agree on what to build. So they sent out this competition, and it's really asking, what does the city stand for? And we thought it stands for like this relationship of the man-built environment with the nature. And the lake is really half nature. And we folded the building into the lake, and the lake goes behind the building. And then you can see the building is more massive towards the street, or the north. The north is straight up. And it becomes more like ephemeral towards the lake. And then there are other things about it. And the next thing is that the building is really just on your way through town. It is a building for the town, and so the people that pass through the town, they should always be somehow caught in the building. They should, without knowing, just walk through the building. So we took all of the north bank and we reshaped it, built these new walls, which look as if they're medieval, but they're brand new. So we built the building way beyond its external walls. It goes like, I don't know how many meters, 100 meters to the south, and probably about 200 meters to the north and east. And when you're walking through town, you don't know until you just somehow into the building, and you see the building sits in the lake, and it's connected to the bank by a little bridge. And so if we move into the building, there's a passage going straight through the building. The walking path goes straight through, and there's an east entrance and a west entrance and the main entrance from the north. And on the right here, there's the big public halls, which are on the level of the lake, of the bottom of the lake. And so when you are there sitting down, you face the eyes of the ducks, because it's their territory, and you've just been allowed to walk into their world. And the idea of this is that when you're walking through town, you inadvertently end up in a space, And in the public halls, there's always something going on. When there's nothing going on, they have the big map of Iceland there. So you can plan your journeys through the country, but generally there is something going on. It can be a political debate, it can be the city trying to introduce something, it can be a ballet, it can be anything. And anybody from the street can go and say, okay, I want to borrow the hall for this. And so it's up to you just to think of an event, and it is yours. So here we see the west side, how the footpaths coming from the west of the city sway into the axis, and you don't know until you are part of the activity in the building. So the building, that whole ground floor, is really a public space or a common place, which is a very good debate, because the more common the public space is, the better. The less it sort of intrudes on you, the better it functions. So here we see the lake pulled around on the northwest side, and the idea is that this part, the dark walls there, they are made really rough, and they are, like we say, it's a part of the building that's sacrificed back to nature. And so the nature, it's given to nature, and nature is allowed to do what it does best on it. The building on the left is the building for the politicians, and so there's a very clear segregation in the building. The whole of the ground floor is for the public. The upper parts of the south building is for the bureaucracy, and the building there on the north side is for the politicians. And their debating chamber is like a big stage onto the city, which is another thing, because we're talking about public space, and public space is not just outside the building. The building itself can be a public face, at least, and it is actually facing its citizens, saying, we are discussing our issues. If you want to come in, come and listen. So you are like encouraged in every way. Because it used to be held, these meetings used to be held on the 5th floor, and nobody went to listen. But this, you have no excuse not to follow what's going on. So we thought it was vital that all of these debates were in front of the public, and it is really encouraging to see, like here you see how it functions when our then mayor was signing a contract allowing the power authorities to sink a huge part of the highlands for a power plant, hydraulic plant. And the people that were against it, they lined up in silence there around the pond, behind her back. And you can imagine the pressure on a politician to have to explain her rhetoric for doing this, and then have to sign it. At least you don't do it without thinking. So that sort of protest is really important. It's so much more important than making noise and throwing some, I don't know, stones. So then the other thing that you always have to think about, while all of this is going on, everything that sort of, despite all of our arguments and disputes, the mosque keeps on growing. And this is the mosque on the black wall I showed you before. It's really kept to its contract, and the nature has taken over that part of the building, and is always there. And what's so interesting about nature is that it has so many faces. It's never the same. In winter, it takes on a completely different appearance, and there is this always changing element in nature. At least in Iceland it is. I don't know what it's like in other countries. And then I will just jump now 30 years ahead, because this was our first project, and we've done a lot of public projects in between, but because I don't have so much time, I'll jump onto our latest project, which is for the new parliament buildings in Iceland. And that has also been on the cards for over 30 years, and they've never been able to agree on how to do it. So they held yet another open competition now, last year, which we happened to win, which was very nice. But it's 30 years later, and we realized there is so much has happened in just how we think about buildings and space, and it's amazing to think what we were thinking then and what we're doing now. So our biggest task now was to try to break down the scale of this building into manageable sizes for this historic part of Reykjavík. Because this area, you see the square up there, that's actually where all the protests were during the financial collapse. You might have seen it in the news. And that little house below there, I can show you with a little circular bit at the bottom, that's the old Parliament House. So the parliament wants to build a new complex for its, so that it functions better. And they chose this site, which happens to be, for some unique stroke of luck, the site where the first settler of the country, who was also a man and a woman, they were a pair, so they settled there and built the first farm there, and that is, and their son was in fact the first like chairman of the first parliament in Iceland, because the idea of a parliament and a forum for settling disputes came with the settlers. It came from Norway, it was known there, and they always upheld this in Iceland. So we have a really historic site in our mind. There's nothing of value, it's just bones and rubbish and all sorts of things, but it tells us a lot about these people. And this is probably the most valuable thing that was found there, which tells us that they were also vain, but there's nothing of like real material value, but a lot of like information about how these people lived. And what is most interesting is that on this ground where the parliament building is going to stand, we have found, there have been found some remains of how they worked the coal from the peat, and with the coal they could make furnaces and work iron ore, and they had really good quality iron. And they had some blacksmithing, and they had boat building. They were unbelievably resourceful people, and that's been established from the excavations. They had like almost they had paths, and they had quite a clever way of dealing with water and drainage, and so they were not stupid, these people, probably much more clever than we are. So this project, or the proposal, builds on this excavation, the archaeological digging down, because you dig through layer after layer, you dig through the eruptions, and you can read the time you dig through. So we say the building is the continuation of these layers, and we are building the new layers, and that is going to reflect who we are as a generation. So on the top of the coal of the iron foundries, you see the rusty-looking building. That's the president's house. That's where the president of the parliament is going to have his office. And because he's above the iron foundry, his building is clad in iron. And then the big building, which is the large complex with all the offices and the committee rooms, is going to have this layered appearance, reminding us that we are building the new layers. And one aspect of every building I should mention is that how it relates to the street outside. So this building is taught, all of the public spaces are on the ground floor, because people come in to the committees and have to have some hearings and present the cases. We have many different parliament committees. So all of these committees are just by the ground, by the street, and they open up to the street. So it's actually opposite the city council chamber. So in this, around this corner pond, you have a lot of people discussing the future of the nation or what to do in the city, and they're all around this blank, reflective pond. The main entrance is there on the left. And just to go a little bit into this history of Parliament, because it is so precious to us in Iceland, because we have had this unbroken agreement, and even in the wildest Viking days, if somebody broke this area of the thing, which is a settlement, everybody ousted him out. He was, even his family, nobody was allowed to break this agreement, and it's still held. It's still holding. And here in the scripture, the first law, it's actually there on the top left. We take the word Alþingi, which is this holy place where everybody is supposed to behave, and we engrave it in the entrance to the building. And above this engraving is a piece in metal, and you see in the ceiling there, it says, "Everything led to this moment." And this piece is done by a sculptor who we work with on this, Kristinn Hrafnsson, and he is reminding us that everything our forefathers did, all their action, has led us to this moment. So likewise, what we do is going to have a course, or also what we don't do is going to have some consequence in the future. But then it's also this bar, which is like a balancing bar, and you can walk there and you can set it going, you can cause some stir, and you can be, difficult and make a lot of noise, but everything seeks balance in the end. So this bar is on 3 gimbals, and it's like you use at sea to find your way. It will find balance. So, and when you come into the building, which is also quite a big theme, is that the footprint of the building is never bigger than you always see out on both sides. You're never encased, you're never locked in a big floor area. And inside there's a little garden, and you see off between the buildings. So it always feels like it's quite a small house you're in, even though the complex is quite big. And you see there, it's a section through, the 2 halves of the buildings have bridges in between, an external space that extends all the way down and opens to the south. Because everything in Iceland has to open to the south, because we are so dependent on the sun. And then you see the building extends also out to the next street in a little house, which is quite sweet. So it sort of stretches its tentacles between 2 streets. So that's the little house in the street to the north. And then we have the West Street, which is where you come quite close to the building, and there's actually a window there. You can see into the archaeological diggings and the old furnaces. So when you walk there, you have a small glimpse into history, and you find out, you learn more about where we came from. And because often history is so close to people, and people are so interested in it, you just need some way of opening this up and letting people understand how much they came before us, even in our place, not to mention yours. So here we see the building, and this thing about the layering is sort of a little bit, it's not only just to mimic the digging through the ground and time passing, it's you know, one thing is to remind us how small our period of time is in the complete picture of time, but also it's about layering. It's about allowing the different layers of society, different aspects of society and different people to exist together. And the more varied the layers are, the more beautiful the whole picture is. So it's sort of like a constant reminder to the people in Parliament that they must think about what they're doing from the viewpoint of all layers of society. Because all layers of society have their representatives there, and that is the beauty of the Parliament. You have opposite views, you have opposite needs and interests, but you have to settle it. And by settling it, you learn more about it. And that is the purpose of the building, is to bring the parliamentarians together so that they're not always sitting there in the protective shields and fighting each other. They're actually having to uphold their views and debate them and then reach the common conclusion. And this is just showing the whole complex, the old Parliament building here on the left where the protests are. And there's a new building that was built in '95, and then it's the new complex is coming in there. And I think I'll pass you on to Steve now.
Thank you very much, and thank you again. Now I'm going to learn this thing. Margaret's been telling you about all that culture in Iceland, which we all know is a lie. So we really have to realize that what matters in every society is that you have a shopping mall, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to buy any socks or underwear. And of course this is how we usually make our money as architects. It's working with the basic levels of society. So when a client of ours who had done an extension to their garage asked, "Would you like to do a car park for my shopping mall?" Of course you don't say no. The project was to extend that blue building, which you see here in the middle, to this octagonal shaped building on the lower part of the screen. That's the city theatre. And they wanted to enlarge the shopping mall to engulf the city theatre, and in doing so create a new kind of marriage between culture and mammon. And because they were making the whole complex bigger, they needed a car park, and that's the bit there, this thing here that we did. Now the trick is that He wanted a big car park. He wanted triple the number of cars that were on the plot at the time, but he didn't want it to cost any more than the ugly car park, which was on the other side of the building. And in addition, just to make matters more fun, he said, I want a public garden and a public space. So you'll see in there, there's a sliver of green, that's a little park, and there's a public space which comes out very badly in this slide, but you'll see it later. Now, that was wonderful. We thought that was great because car parks are actually one of the most underrated architectural devices that you can ever enjoy playing with. But it wasn't just that. He said, you know, we've had an artist with this project because we've been trying to develop this area for about 10 years. And at the beginning we had a competition, there was an art piece made, and there's an artist that's there. And of course he would like to have his piece put up. So, okay, now I've learned how to work this thing. So we saw the piece, we said, well, okay, there's a bunch of tubes and stuff. We don't want that in our car park, do we? And we were well aware that the artist, who happens to be the same fellow that Margaret was introducing with the Parliament building, he'd probably got a little bit tired with his piece too, because it was 10 years old. So he said, let's dump all this stuff and have the artist with us instead. So we embraced him as part of the design team. And with that, he can actually, with us, make the largest intervention or art intervention in the country. So the thing about shopping malls is that they're about now. You know, Mark's been talking about the Parliament building, that's all about the past and where we're going, but shopping centres are only about now. Nobody wants to think about the old socks that you bought last year, and no one even knows what kind of socks will be sold next year. So we knew that everyone is so concerned about now, they're not going to be thinking about the car park. No one's going to be cleaning it, no one's going to be changing the light bulbs, nobody is going to give it any care whatsoever. So what we've got to do is make the car park like landscape. It has to be something that looks after itself. Doesn't matter what happens, whatever the weather is, however people use it, it's always going to look half decent. So we were looking at the mountain behind as an inspiration, something that went at a geological pace. So we made a space on the upper level using these lamp posts. So when you're there, you're in between these posts, and you actually realize, okay, I am somewhere. I've arrived at my destination. And then, of course, because it's nice half of the year in Iceland and awful for the other half of the year, it just gets dark, it had to be pretty decent in the darkness too. So there's a certain sense of theatre there. But in order to get 300 car parking spaces where there were only 100, we couldn't do it just on one level. So we had to put another level below. And with that, we made a staircase down between the two. The staircase occupies a crack between the car parking spaces. And with that, we let light into the lower level, we let rain into the lower level and snow. We also allow the lower level to ventilate, so we don't need to have any fire protection systems or anything like that. And people get a sense that it's brighter and lighter than you normally experience in a car park. The other thing is that when you're making a project of this size, you're having to dig a big hole to make it work. You know, we had to dig down maybe 1.5 meters through rock to make this low level, and so the top of the building was not too high. That means that every 10 centimeters costs an awful lot of money. So by using the cheapest construction method possible, which is precast post-tensioned concrete slabs, we could cut up into the slabs and put the lighting in the slab so it didn't project below. That gains you 10 centimeters, and you save a bunch of money. And with that, you can start to pay for the other things that the client wanted, which is his public space and his garden. So right on the edge of the car park, you'll see here, this is just a walkway where people walk to go to a safe area where they don't need to walk between cars. They'll be overlooking the garden on the way into the shopping mall and out onto the public square. And here we see the principal material choice that we worked with Kristin, and that is the Icelandic basalt stone, which we used in different forms. We used it outside of the stone. You probably know it's the hexagonal stuff that comes in columns. You can take the outside off and make this ashlar wall, which we laid horizontally because normally it occurs naturally in a vertical form, and we know that a shopping mall is fake. So we do it in a fake way, and then we use the fake basalt, which is the rusty sheet metal piling, to actually hold up the car park. The inner core of the basalt is used on the paving here. So every part of the stone is used. There's no wastage. Every single piece was used to its ultimate. And with that, we also gain a little bit more money. And in fact, the building was so effective is that we only had to make a very small concession. We built in a glass handrail, which we thought would be a level of complication that we could afford to lose. And we had to throw it out, and the client asked us, well, is it better? Well, actually we were quite happy because it was in there just to throw out in the first place. It's what we call sacrificial design. But actually he was starting to even get into this mindset that you have to make a place, you have to make it precise and elegant, and he actually was almost prepared to whip out his wallet and pay for all the glass handrails. But in the end, it's completely unnecessary because the building has a more holistic appearance just as it is. Now, Kristin worked with us not only to develop the material choice and how that's organized, but also in the implementation of this storeroom. This says geimsla, it means store in Icelandic. Now, because we're talking about now, we chose to ask all the shops in the mall if they could give us samples of their goods that they were selling. Things like nasal hair trimmers and those beautiful glass objects with swirly pink things on the end that were so fashionable in 2000. And some also equally ugly knives and forks. And these things were collected and put into sealed containers, and they're put in the store, so when the building collapses of its own accord, there'll be this record of where we were in the year 2000. He also developed a series of manhole covers or drains so that when the public square was wet, when it was raining, that the rain would be going down these digitized poems which he placed at strategic positions on the square. It's really a situation where you incorporate the art in a way that it's not immediately obvious. You don't walk into that square and say, oh my God, there's an art piece over there on the corner. It's just that you are enveloped with it and you feel it with the back of your neck. It's a presence. And it was a very, very wonderful moment that I just happened to be there 2 or 3 years after the car park was open. And a couple of girls walked across the square, and they must have been architecture students or something, and they must have been foreign, because one said to the other, oh, it's a place. And it was just like, oh, wow, at least 2 people on the planet noticed that we did something. And those 2 people made it really worthwhile. It was a wonderful moment for us. And then this is just one thing by chance. The joining of sheet metal piling has this wonderful form. And Kristin, the artist, says, well, this is just like the art and the architecture is coming together. So it was very, very beautiful. And it just sort of summed up how, in a way, we started our relationship with Kristin through this project. Because he actually took part in this one with us too. Now, this is actually a more tragic project. The owner of the shopping centre, it's a couple of brothers and their sisters who are less involved in the running of it. But one of the brothers lost, or he and his wife lost their daughter in a tragic motor accident. And they asked Kristin to make a memorial for their daughter. It's a difficult project. You never know how to start. And Kristin worked on it for some months. And in the end, it wasn't happening for him. So he said, could I talk to Margaret and Steve about this project too? And the client agreed. And the location, sorry, I've inadvertently pressed a button here. The location is this graveyard. And what was really expected of us was to make something out of granite that was maybe 2 meters by 2 meters. None of us really engaged with that as an idea, as something that would bring the memory of their daughter through time. So we started looking at other things, and the more we looked at this place, we saw, there's some marks here, you see. It's like the earth has been cut with a knife and it's left a scar. And then we started taking photographs, and the photographs we took, these are just from 5 years ago, they could have been from 50 years ago. Even though this place is right on the edge of the Reykjavik conurbation, it hadn't been touched. It had been left alone by some stroke of fate. I said, wow, this is fantastic. Nothing that we do will compete with this record of how humans have inhabited this site. Now, this actually wasn't anything new to anybody. Archaeologists had gone there, and actually they'd recorded all of these sites. You see all the red dots are all the places where there's a significant human remnant left on the spot. So we said, okay, this is only 97 hectares. Why don't we just slap a preservation order on it? And we say that the preservation of this area is then going to be the memory of their daughter. So instead of doing something, we do nothing because that's too powerful. Not least because exactly at that time, there was a tremendous build-up to, in the industry in Iceland, it was prior to the crash, and we were building enormous new areas and planning new areas, like this one, which was supposed to be on this spot. That was what was planned to be there. So, amazingly, it took 1.5 sentences for us explaining what our idea was to the client, for him to say, of course we'll do that. He then put it to the city, and the city dumped this plan, which would have made them a bunch of money, and the area is now preserved for prosperity. As a result of that, we sort of, okay, that's fine, and we just took a breath of fresh air. And then the client said, well, that was very nice, but how about building my house? So we took this area here. This is the area we're just looking at. And we moved it over to here, which is where his family house was. His family house was the house that his daughter grew up in. He wanted to raze it to the ground and build a new house. He wanted to start a new life. Well, they, as a family, needs to start a new life. Excuse me, I'm always saying it was very much a relationship with him, and his client agreed. And his wife seemed to agree with everything that the decisions he made. This is not the way that we normally like to work. So, the site had this slight trapezoidal form. See there at the top, that's where you can drive into the site, and then it has this trapezoidal form, and of course, it's too small a site for the house they wanted. So we had to shoehorn the site, the building into the site. So the building sort of squeezes itself into every corner that it could possibly go. We had to increase the planning allowances for the whole area, and that was all rather tortuous. And on top of that, we put a roof, which is like a fan. So the building gets bigger as it gets towards the south. It's the south side. And that roof then runs, as we go deeper into the building, get some more and more exaggerated until you get to the end. And then you get these spaces which are within this folded roof. So it's one side it's very open and light and horizontal, in other places it's very compressed and very intimate. So we spent some years putting this house together, and luckily this is now post-crash, so we have time, and we have excellent craftsmen, and it was a joy to work with these people to make a building that every single piece was custom designed and custom built. We designed all the window profiles, all the doors, every single thing was custom made, and all of it was made in Iceland. So this is really quite a piece of work. And in the end, you just get a house which is a very solid object. But after going through all of this, we felt there was something missing about the graveyard project. We thought we hadn't quite summed that up. So we went back to it and started thinking more, what else should we do? And we remembered one thing which was very important. When that medieval society was living there, they could survive through the winter only because there was a spring that never froze. And the spring was under this rock. And the location of that spring is there. If you go directly north from that spring, you get to the location of their daughter's grave. We thought, well, maybe there's something telling us we should do something here. Maybe what we need to do is make a conversation between these two places, a place between life and a place between the the afterlife. So we thought, maybe we can make a gate. Maybe we can make this edge of the graveyard with a more elegant edge than it is at the moment. It was a barbed wire fence. So we thought we could make a wall, which is like a ha-ha, so it's smooth on top and steps down on the other side. So the sheep that would be here, the sheep that are running around here, the well or the spring couldn't get in. There'd be a gate here. And we thought this was a wonderful thing, make a 200-meter long dry stone wall. The problem is, there's no rock, it's very expensive. But it just so happened that they were starting to make a road through the adjacent lava field. And there was a lot of public commotion against this road because it was seen as a historic site, and Iceland's most famous painter had been painting paintings there. And everyone protested, and these nice old people were being carried away by the police. But in this destruction, there was something beautiful that came. We got free rock. And if you marry free rock with people that have this kind of skill, then you can make a wall like this. So it's just a simple dry stone wall that just separates the graveyard from the pasture and the land beyond. And again, it's something that nobody would really notice, but every now and then, if you want to take a walk down to the spring, which is that stone which you just see there right in the middle of the picture, you can take this route. And on the way there, you just write that, you read on the gate, it says, "Allt til eilífa," everything to eternity. So it's just remind you where you are in the cycle of things. I've got one more project, and actually Herman has sort of prepared you for this project. This is Iceland again. I think it's his slide. I stole it for him. And you know that in Central Europe you're in a very important place, but you should realize that it's nothing like as important as Iceland, because it's a tiny nation that is very aware of how special it is. And these are the three main urban centers in Iceland, and this is where the tourists tend to head to. The thing is, there's another place up there, it's called Grimsey. And there are only 90 people, and they're even more important because they've got their own island. And they want to have a little bit of that tourist action. And they are always trying to encourage people to come there because they just happen to be on the Arctic Circle. So there used to be a business that you could take a boat there or fly there, and you could go to the Arctic Circle and you get a certificate to say that you've crossed the Arctic Circle. And I thought, okay, well, let's do something to try and encourage people to come there. I held an open competition, and we decided to team up with Kristin again and make a proposal for this monument to the Arctic Circle. In the documentation for the competition, they said the Arctic Circle moves 15 centimeters a year. We said, wow, we didn't know that. We always thought it was just this line on a map. But the more we looked at it, we realized that it doesn't move 15 centimeters. They got they had a typo, and it's 15.5 meters. So it's actually doing something else than what we thought it was doing. So this is the island, and this is the movement of the Arctic Circle. and actually entered the island of Grimsey in 1717, right here at the bottom. And it's taken nearly 3 centuries to move up to the top. And now it's just about where that black line is. And it's moving up and down all the time. So we made this proposal where we just put a big ball. It's one of your big balls we've just taken in from Munich. And we put it up there, and every year on the summer solstice, the idea is that all of the islanders and the foreigners and the dogs and the tractors and everything would move this ball to a new location. And then at the end, when it keeps on moving north, in 2047 it will eventually move off the island, just kick into the ocean. We don't need to worry about it again for 20,000 years when it comes back again. That's somebody else's problem. Now, it's taken 3 years to develop this. Now, when they started, there was only the little ferry that went from the mainland to this island, and a little aeroplane that went every now and then. But now, there are 30 cruise ships coming this summer with, God knows how many thousand people. It's probably something like 500,000 people will descend on this island. And of course now, they're probably all traipse all the way out to the end of the island to see this globe. So what they're doing is actually encouraging the destruction of their island that they really thought they'd just make. So this is our piece, sitting out there. This is where it's located. And actually, in 2 weeks' time, we'll be at the opening ceremony. And this is Christian. He's just about to leave. We can move forward 2047, where we'll both be out there in our Zimmer frames to kick the ball into the ocean. Thank you very much.